Okay, so last week we were kind of talking about Halloween and all that and kind of its origins, where it came from, and the Christian response and all that. And so um, there was a lot of stuff about like the roots in paganism and stuff. And so I was thinking about that this past week, and I've also been reading a few books. One of them is called "Come Out of Her, My People." It looks like this by C.J. Coster, and it has a lot of it has a lot of information about like holidays and just their origins and what they mean and where everything came from and stuff. And it seems like so much is steeped in paganism, and so much of Christianity and like what we do today, like as the church and stuff, just has like a lot of pagan roots. And so lately I've been kind of feeling like there's everything's steeped in paganism, and like how do you get out of it, and where do you go? And so like that's kind of where I was hoping I could get um, some more thoughts and stuff, and we could talk about that a little bit. And we were talking about it, so let's just
Yeah,
talk about it
we've
more.
had like a kind of an hour warm up here. We should have hit record and already been done, but um, but yeah, it's a great question because I think like as I started to learn more about these things, and I've used this analogy over and over again, um, of the Matrix and that movie, how it was so fitting at the time. I was just starting to learn a lot of this stuff in detail. I felt the same way. I felt like what isn't contaminated, what hasn't been twisted, corrupted, counterfeited, polluted by the enemy, by Satan. And that's a really valid question, I think, that we have to ask. If something isn't pleasing to our Creator, but we cling to it and hold on to it, then and especially if we're not even willing to question it and hold it up to scrutiny, then that's a really dangerous place to be. And so yeah, like how do we kind of sort all that out? And I think part of it is we have to study for ourselves, compile the evidence, and you had some really good prayer ideas too. We can bring this to Father and say, hey, is this pleasing to you? You know, does this does this please you? And if not, then I don't want it in my life. And you look at some of the prophets, and they said, how am I to be a spokesperson for the Almighty One when I live among such a contaminated people, and I am a man of unclean lips, and all these kind of things. And I think um, we don't take that very seriously, but we're quick to surround ourselves and saturate ourselves in the culture around us without really challenging not only the origins but the impact of those things that we're embracing in our lives.
Hmm.
Yeah. It feels like we all want to know truth, but then we recognize the amount of time investment and just the cost it's going to take us to find that. And so there's almost like this resistance of like, oh my gosh, if paganism runs so deep, like for me to actually understand this and how many things are tied and what is pagan and what is not, I think there's a sense of overwhelmment. And I've found that with myself, and I've found that in talking to other people when I bring up things. It's just like, man, I wouldn't even know where to start, and that's, a never-ending study for the rest of my life, which I believe, we're supposed to grow. We're supposed to kind of continue to study for the rest of our life. And so, how do we as people change and be willing to dive into that and not just be overwhelmed and write it off because it's just too much?
Hmm.
Um, and I'm trying to even figure out what the change was for me, but at some point it was no longer this. I still see it as this overwhelming task, but there's also this piece of me that's like never-ending conviction that's like, I want to know what I believe and why I believe it, and I want to know it for myself. And so it encourages me to kind of just take little pieces bit by bit. But it
That's
seems like a lot of people are overwhelmed by that.
Yeah, and what would
yeah.
I mean? Someone might say, "Well, you're seeing, you're looking for the devil and everything. Like you're just seeing the devil all the time," and that would be a valid criticism as well. Because we do have to be careful with where we go, like how we approach things, and the end goal has to be really clear. Like it's
Hmm.
um, because we can get sucked into. I mean, I know like there's a lot of people who are really heavy into like end times and kind of apocalypse and kind of all that thinking, and they get caught up in the negative side of it, and they start to get pulled into a fear-based approach to a lot of this, and we don't want that either.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I think one of the dangers, or at least something I have to watch for, I I have fallen into it, and I probably will again, and I just have to be in constant awareness, is like you said, like it's the end goal that's really important. What is that? And that's to know the Lord, like know Father, and do what he says, and like, that, like the pursuit of truth because we love him, and like, like, and I think sometimes like I get in the trap of like the pursuit of knowledge and stuff, and like trying to get it all and stuff, and like I think if you approach it like wholesale, you're like, I got to get it all or nothing, you'll never get there. And like that bite-sized approach is like really important. And I think, yeah, knowing what you believe and why you believe it, like those are like huge questions. But even like, I think the end goals are tied up in those questions, but I think you even have to be careful there. Like, it's like, okay, I know what I believe and why I believe it, but like sometimes you can even leave Father out of that, and that's dangerous, And so it's like, yeah, it's really tough because
Mhm.
it can be so time consuming. And I like what you said, like it's a lifelong journey, it's a lifelong effort, and like I think you just got to chip away and keep doing it every day. And like, yeah, not a lot of people are willing to do that, and I would even venture to say I'm not willing to do that in like every part of my life or angle of my life yet. I'm still working on that, trying to figure it out, because it's like one thing it's so easy to get and grab and run with, and even if it's a little bit of a challenge, I'm like, okay, that one's challenging, but I really feel like I'm supposed to do it. And maybe it's because there's not a sacrifice like really attached to it, whereas like maybe something else that it's like it's a very similar topic or principle, but like because I'm more attached to the thing that it's associated with, it's harder to let go and
Yeah.
harder to obey.
Yeah,
Mhm.
one of the things you said reminded me of a specific verse. You said, again, asking the question, what is the end goal? And it reminded me of Ecclesiastes 12:13, and of course, Ecclesiastes being usually attributed to Solomon, the wisest man that has ever lived. And he writes in Ecclesiastes 12:13, he says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the entire matter. Fear Elohim, fear God, and guard his commands, for this applies to all mankind." And then some other translations, that was from the Scriptures translation, but like the King James says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." And literally that word duty doesn't appear in the Hebrew, but the concept is this is the wholeness of man. Like this is everything, this is the entire purpose of mankind, is to, number one, fear the Creator, and number two, do what he commands, do what is pleasing to him, and it makes sense because he created us, he knows what works for us. And anytime we try to contradict that with our own ideas or our own ways, we're walking contrary not only to our own nature that he created in us, but we're walking contrary to his nature, who he is. And it's not about just going along with a whole bunch of things that he wants. I mean, that's part of it, but it's about being consistent with who he is. And
Mhm.
we want our children to emulate the good values that we try to teach them. But if they reject that later on in life, they're not only rejecting what we've taught them, they're rejecting who we are as people. They're walking contrary to our nature, to our character. And that's really kind of a deeper level of thinking about it that way. It's not just so simple as following these rules or doing these things or rejecting these kind of, origins that are pagan and trying to purify our expression of worship. That's part of it, but it goes so much deeper than that, I think.
Yeah, I love that because I was thinking the same thing, that it's not just about rejecting something that's pagan, but are we really willing to follow the word? And I had a conversation this week with someone down here in Costa Rica, and they were just having a really hard time taking the Bible literally. And they brought up some really controversial verses, and I don't have it in front of me. Somewhere in Exodus, right up to the Ten Commandments, says something about if you hit your father and mother, you should die. And that's what he said. And I can look it up as we're talking. But he said, I can't take that literally. And I asked him a question that I have to ask myself that's super hard. Like, am I willing to put the biblical authority above my head so that I can make the right decisions in my life? and maybe respect for our parents is that critical to God, and he put that authority figure in place that like he really means that. Now I need to study that a little bit further and understand it, but I was asking that same question, like what if that's exactly what it means? Are we willing to, can we even swallow that? That's a tough one, like what do we think about that? And so
Right.
I think the idea is, like, are we really willing to obey his commands? And not that that's the focus there, but to me, I was trying to make the correlation that I really agree that it's not just about not doing pagan things, but it's a deeper subject of, are we willing to follow and obey the word? And had some verses right when you said that, Andrew, is really interesting. It just sparks an idea in my head, and so if I can, I just want to share some words, because you're sharing in Ecclesiastes, and something that I think really backs it up on the New Testament side is John, the beloved disciple, in 14 and 15 is quoting Jesus, and so Jesus is speaking here, and he says this a few different times, or Yahushua is saying this a few different times, and I just want to share them because they stood out to me this week when I was studying, and so you guys cool with that?
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, so John 14:15, and again, this is all Messiah talking. It says, "If you love me, you shall guard my commands." John 14:21, "He who possesses my commands and guards them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me shall be loved by my Father, and I shall love him and manifest myself to him." John 14:23, Yahushua answered him, "If anyone loves me, he shall guard my word, and my Father shall love him, and we shall come to him and make our stay with him. He who does not love me does not guard my words, and the word which you hear is not mine, but of the Father who sent me." John 15:7, "If you stay in me, and my words stay in you, and shall ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you." And we use that verse a lot, but the idea is first on having his words in us, following the whole word. John 15:10, "If you guard my commands, you shall stay in my love, even as I have guarded my Father's commands and stay in his love." John 15:13 and 14, "No one has greater love than this, that one should lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you." And it's just interesting, right? Over these two chapters, he's really emulating what you were saying in Ecclesiastes. And this is coming straight from Messiah himself. So to me, if God says something once that's important, he says it in just basically one page, 7 different times.
Well, and I think most people, I think a lot of people hijack that, though, and they would say, well, Jesus or Yahushua commanded, new things, so we follow the commandments of Jesus, but that's not necessarily the Old Testament commandments, and they try to drive a wedge between those two things, and they try to separate them.
Mm-hmm.
But when people kind of make that argument, I always try to point them back to the fact that Yahushua said, "I did not speak anything of myself, but only what the Father told me to say, that I've said." And so he wasn't saying anything new. He expounded on what Father had always communicated through the prophets, through the Torah or the instructions, what people commonly misterm the law. But he expounded on that, and he drove a deeper standard, but he didn't bring anything brand new.
Yeah, he didn't, and a lot of the stuff that he was saying was straight from the Old Testament. But I mean, one of the verses I read, 15:9 or 15:10, says, "If you guard my commands, you shall stay in my love, even as I have guarded my Father's commands and stay in his love." The only thing we know of the Father's commands, of Yahweh's commands, are from the Old Testament. So it's maybe not the only thing, but one of the main things we know is from the Old Testament. So right there, he's quoting and saying, like, he's answering that question you just asked directly.
Yeah, and this really raises kind of the governmental question, the question of government, like you said, of authority. Do we place the word of Yahweh as our ultimate authority in our lives? Excuse me. But not only that, human authority. How do we deal with human authority? And then, I mean, this is kind of a bit of a scattered topic because it's so massive, but it also pulls in elements of legalism, like we touched on at the end of or in last week's show. what is legalism, and driving back to what you were referring to that was brought up in your conversation this week about stoning children if they strike their mother or father. I found that in Exodus 21:15. It is a very harsh command, but it's a governmental question. It's a judicial question, and that kind of fast forward. I'm just throwing a whole bunch of like big shotgun kind of presentation on these huge themes. But another theme that connects into that: are we to judge? Everybody likes to hold up "judge not, lest you be judged," and what is the concept of judging? And so we have kind of all these things that are intertwined. And for example, how do we reconcile that passage in Exodus 21? Should we stone our children if they hit us? Well, obviously, no. I mean, we're not in a governmental system, a civil system that would allow that. And I think we can see that there's this ideal, like in a perfectly righteous society. If someone in that society was debased enough to have such total utter disrespect for their parent that happened, where Yahweh was king, Yahushua was reigning on his throne on the earth, then yeah, that punishment would be instantaneous and complete, and I would totally agree with it. And I think what we miss a lot of times in the context is that it's not just talking about a quirk behavior of a child. And we could unpack that entire verse and look at the Hebrew and go and dive a lot deeper. But it's referring to a person who is so corrupted in their thinking and behavior that they are a disease in the camp. And that disease, that utter disrespect for authority, and contempt for the structure, the governmental structure that Yahweh established, has to be dealt with, and it just cannot be tolerated. It's very much the same as, and of course people might take huge issue with this, but it's the same as letting a known rapist roam the streets. Like, there's repentance, forgiveness, and there's deliverance for sure, but there's also severe consequences in the natural world for natural actions.
So let me circle this up. On all the things you just said, how do you reconcile when someone, my screen just showed Shaw's blank chair, that's funny. How do you reconcile when someone says, that's great, it's back to this feeling of overwhelmment just on the pagan stuff, but take away the pagan stuff, how do you reconcile when someone says, you really, that's not face value, I don't get that when I read the text. I'm a simple-minded person, I read the text, I don't get all that, and I don't have the, and they'll say I don't have the time and stuff, and I know we could talk about that in itself, but just this idea of I read the text and I didn't get that, and it feels really overwhelming for me to have to try to go and study every verse I don't understand, and my kind of gut reaction is yeah, that's what we're called to do. If it's going to be our authority, we need to know it inside and out and really understand what we're claiming as our authority. Is it really our authority or not? And the only way it really could be is if we understood it and we studied it and we meditated on it. But I feel like a lot of people have that kind of question, back to the overwhelming.
That's a fantastic question. No, it's a fantastic question. And I think what we forget is, and what we were never really taught is, again, that was written thousands of years ago to a culture that was already very much built around the sacred and the sanctity of authority in the home, for example. And so there was this established cultural government. I mean, today you can't, it's everything that's pushed on the young generations, like entertainment, movies, all these things. It's all about challenging authority. It's about tearing down authority. It's about becoming your own person and having this free spirit and all this freedom, just liberty and all this stuff that defines our culture today. And it's almost an exact opposite of what the original family unit was like. And as these human institutions that Father established on the earth to give us a picture of Him, the relationship between a husband and a wife, the relationship of parents to their children, the family structure, all of those things are pictures of how we connect to and relate with our Heavenly Father. And as those things are debased and attacked and as they disintegrate, we lose any frame of reference on who our Heavenly Father is. And so I think like one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, what are we missing from a contextual, cultural, historical perspective when we read these verses? We don't, like you said, we don't read the surface of the text and get all that depth. But we have to approach every verse asking that question. What am I missing reading this verse 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years later? And what do I need to understand in addition to the English that I'm reading in order to get the Creator's true intention for this passage?
So how do you reconcile when someone says, that's way too overwhelming, like I can't, that's just too much, I can't approach every verse and ask those questions?
That's like, it's interesting because it's like, I mean, look at any relationship. Like, let's say I approached my relationship with Emily like that, which, like, that would be so silly.
Mhm.
Like, you want to know your wife like as best as possible, and so I would say that, right? Like, I'd say I want to know Emily the best that I possibly can. So like, I spend time with her, I talk to her, I ask her things, I listen to her. Um, if she wrote a book about everything awesome about her and like things she wanted me to do and like how I could like, like be loving to her and all that and help her out, I would be all over that book. And so like I think it's interesting, like you're challenging like the idea behind, we say a lot of things. We say, yeah, I want to pursue truth. I think you talk to almost anybody who, is in like the faith like thing or just in life, they're like, yeah, I want to know truth. Like, who
Well,
doesn't want to
even
know truth? I want to be
I,
lied to all the time.
I
Sweet.
think even atheists would say they're pursuing truth. They would
Yeah.
say that God's not true, and I don't want to believe in something that's not true. So I mean, I think that applies to anyone. I think
Yeah.
I think I think
Silly.
pagans and even occultists and Satanists would say they're pursuing truth. They just have a radically different truth than we
Right.
do.
And so everybody wants that, I think. And I think we can say that wholesale. Like, I don't know anybody who wants to just be fed lies. But, well, interesting you brought up the Matrix side thought. But,
Hmm.
so it's like, yeah, I want to know the Lord as best as I can. I've said that 1,000 times, like in my life, like, but then instead of, it's interesting how I find time to do other stuff, like, but I don't find time to connect. It's like, well, who has time for that? I don't
Hmm.
know, but I played PS3 for 3 hours the other day,
Hmm.
and so it's just like, it's a choice. Like, you gotta choose. So like, I don't know what you're spending your time on and stuff, but like I would challenge, like, do you really want that? That's my question. And like, but even someone who even says that, like, my gut is like it's gonna be like the automatic defenses go up and they're gonna feel judged and they're all that. But it's just like, like, I get challenged like all the time. I'll say something and then someone will call me out on it, and it's rough, and I don't like that. Like, but it's just silly. Like, to
I love what you said about the relationship, because that
yeah,
answers the deeper question. Like,
It's a
really,
great
it's asking
analogy.
what our priority is, what our true love is,
yeah,
what are our
Yeah,
desires.
and time is worship. I think that's something we don't connect a lot of times.
yeah. That's good.
Time is worship. How we spend our time, that is a form of worship. It's one of the things we've been given that we can use. We've been given the choice how to use it, and we can either serve our Creator with it, or we can use it for ourselves. We can spend it wisely or foolishly. And I
Hmm.
love your analogy. Another great analogy I think of, kind of to kind of illustrate just sort of the logical foolishness of that sort of defense mechanism when people say that. and I've justified it in my own mind too, right? I think,
Oh, me too. Yeah.
but it's not I don't have time or this or that. It's like I would rather do this versus that, even though I know I should
Mm-hmm.
spend time in the Word or whatever it is. But a great analogy is it's like, how much sense would it make for the captain of a ship to say, "Oh, I don't really have time to go over the charts and to make sure I know the coordinates and to look at this navigation stuff. I'm just gonna wing it. Like I'll just let's throw the rudder this way a little bit and that way a little bit and hope it works out in the end." And I think that's what a lot of people do with their lives. And I know I do that with my life in certain areas. I think, you know, I really, yeah, it would take a lot of work, and I don't really want to put that effort in. So I'm just going to hope for the best. I'm going to go in this direction, and we'll see what happens. But the problem with that is, in those areas of life, and ultimately, if you live your life that way, you're going to find the icebergs. You're going to crash into land. You're going to end up a million miles away from where you wanted to be. And your
Mm-hmm.
destination is not going to be the destination. You can look at a map. You can read the Word. You can read the entire Bible. And you can say, yes, this is how I want to live my life. This is the destination that I want to sail for. But if you don't actually do something about that, if you don't understand how to navigate there, and if you don't actually take the necessary steps to get there, you're going to be off course. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
you can't get to a destination across the world by luck. You know, it's not going to happen. And never mind when a storm comes into the picture and you get blown way off course. And then how do you get back on course? You know, and so those are
Mm.
all just really kind of
Yeah.
powerful analogies that kind of put a real tangible feel to it. And I love the marriage analogy too, because yeah, would you say I don't have time to know my spouse? I don't feel like, you know, now we're married, we're good, like we know each other, we're not gonna
Yeah.
change, so I'm done. I'm done investing
But
in that relationship.
what I love that Shaw said though is the truth is nobody would say that. Everyone would say
Exactly.
I'm seeking. They're saying I'm seeking truth, but their actions may not resolve that. And I think part of it, even parts of my life, and even right now, there's things where I've deceived myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I'm really seeking truth, but if I were to really kind of take an inventory and look back at my actions, I'd probably be pretty surprised at what I'm investing my time into and really what I'm worshiping. And
That's
so
yeah, that's so interesting. I like what you said, Andrew, about it's almost like it's not that you don't want to spend your time, it would like be like you'd rather do something else. And
Hmm.
I think sometimes I forget the big picture. It's like, yes, I want to be like completely connected and have like this amazing relationship with God, and I feel like I'm on that, like, I don't know, I'd hope or feel like I'm on that path or whatever. And that's my dog being crazy. Stop that. Um, but like like day to day, I don't put in the work and stuff. It's like I don't. It's like I'm walking across the United States, but then I just stay in the same place. I don't walk anything. Like you got to keep moving towards that end goal, like in some way. Like even
Yeah.
with like all the work that we do, we're always like, man, we haven't got to that yet. Like what can we do today just to like move that along a little bit and stuff. And then I think the more focused you get, like, and you realize the advantages of like focus, like it's good. It's
Yeah,
really good.
and I think it's very convicting to me personally too, because I can see how that plays out in my life. I have this intense desire to be a great dad, to be an awesome husband, to be a powerful witness for my King on the earth, and like that. I mean, that's what I want more than anything. But in a lot of ways, like, do I actually do the things that make those things happen?
Yeah.
And how much do we just hope those things happen to us, or
Hmm.
how much do we actually take actions every single day? Discipline. I mean, there's a great verse. I can look it up in a second, but I think Paul writes, does a soldier is a soldier undisciplined? Like if we are servants of the Most High King, you know, do we act like his servants and then not obey his instructions, not obey his orders? Do we, you know, are we lazy? Like what kind of soldier, just lets themselves get fat and doesn't practice with the sword and isn't trained and is lazy and all this kind of stuff? That would not be a soldier. It wouldn't be a useful soldier in any case.
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
I was just going to ask, what do we think the word says about all this stuff that we're talking about? Because it sounds like at least the three of us are agreeing that if we love Father and we're followers of Yeshua, our King, it would show in our actions. But it sounds like there's a struggle for all humans, us included, to actually live that out daily. And so, what does the word say about it? And I love what you just said. It's like it's a real thing. We have to act as though we were soldiers. Like this isn't. It is the battle of our lives, the course of our lives. And one of the things I just thought about was 1 Corinthians 9:24, and it says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race indeed all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way as to obtain it." That's the end of it. I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, no, that's a good one.
And 25 continues on. It says, "And everyone who competes controls himself in every way. Now they do it to receive a corruptible crown, but we for an incorruptible crown. Therefore I run accordingly, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I treat my body severely and make it my slave, lest having proclaimed to others, I myself might be rejected." And that's 24
awesome.
through 27.
Yeah, I mean, think about the dedication and the time and the effort that the Olympians put into their performance as athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about literally hours and hours every single day, shaping their bodies and challenging themselves and pushing themselves to achieve greater and greater successes in that particular sport or area. And then compare that to how, I hate using such a mixed metaphor, and I hate the Olympics and Olympians and all that stuff, but as Olympians of faith, like
Andrew hates Olympians.
I hate Olympians, not the people, the whole, you know what I mean. But
people might not, but
well, again, it's back to like everything's contaminated. I mean, just do your own research. Look at what the Olympics came out of. Enough said.
Mm-hmm.
But as competitors in faith, again, we're competing with ourselves. We're competing against our fleshly human natures that would just naturally go to autopilot and take us off course. We're competing against that. We're overcoming the entanglements of the world. What if we treated our faith like Olympians treat their profession? I mean, seriously, like, who would we be? What kind of... And there are people like this, and I admire them so much, and they're such a great example. And I look at specific ones, and I think, wow, they're not perfect. I'm not going to say they have everything right, and I'm not going to worship them as because they're just people. But it's like there is something to emulate about that, and that level of dedication. And kind of dovetailing right on that, I found 2 Timothy 2:3-4 is powerful as well, and that's when I was referring. Suffer hardship with us as a good soldier of Yahushua Messiah. No one serving as a soldier gets involved in the affairs of this life in order to please only him who enlisted him as a soldier. And then it's again back to this competition, continuing on in verse 5, kind of connecting back to 1 Corinthians 9, what you're reading, Ken, still in 2 Timothy 2. "And if anyone competes in a game, he is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. The hard-working farmer ought to be first to receive his share in the crops," and it continues on. But we forget that, right? If an Olympian just shot out at a race and is tripping the other runners and pushing them and knocking them off the track or whatever, right? They could be doping, they could be whatever. They're going to be disqualified from that race. They're running the same race, they have the same goal, they're trying to win, but they're not following the rules. And it just blows my mind how much is there that is so clear that we have just missed because of our predisposition to allowing ourselves to be entangled in the affairs of this world, to get comfortable with it,
Yeah. And just like the entitlement, like yeah, it's so interesting how like the I don't know the social constructs of our world and how we grew up. Like it's what can you get for nothing, and like unfortunately that like permeates into like even our relationships with father and stuff. And like so many times I'm like, I want this amazing relationship and stuff, but I'm not doing anything. So like, how can I expect like to
Hmm.
have that? And then when I back up, and like you said, it's not
Hmm.
about people, but when I back up and look at the men like and women in my life that are like amazing examples of just uh just a pure and loving and obedient connection to Father, like it's like I look at what do they do, and it's interesting, like almost across the board, and I wouldn't even say almost across the board, they spend time with Father. They read, his word, and they do what he says, like across the board every single time. And like, there's not very many people that like, like I want my kids to turn out like, and every single one of them has those things like in them,
Mm.
and it's like they are putting in the work, they are training for the marathon, they are doing those things. And it's just like you're not gonna go run a marathon, you're not gonna make it to the end if you just show up to the marathon like the day
Yeah,
it's happening. I don't
I
know,
think
it's
this idea of overwhelmment's kind of hot on my mind just because a lot of people I've talked to recently have expressed the same thing. So I think that's why it's standing out. And I think about that, and because the answer to all this is like, yeah, but wow, that feels like a lot. And it's, yeah, the word, it says some really tough stuff. So everything we just said there about training and all that, I mean, it doesn't
mm,
feel good, and it's not easy. Like it
yeah,
really, it's, in marriage, same thing. Like if you want to have a good marriage, you're going to really work for it. If you want to be an athlete, you're really going to work for it.
mm,
If you don't want to wreck a ship, you're really going to work, you're going to study to make sure you can sail across the ocean.
Yeah,
Um,
and I
you know,
think I gotta jump in because I think whenever I have that reaction in myself, I try to catch myself.
mhm.
Because there's it's not that it's not a lot of work. It is a lot of work. But if something comes in front of us and we say, oh, that's so much effort, that's right there a check. That should be a check in our spirit, like, wait a minute, I'm not in the right place that I need to be in. Because
Totally
if we're
agree.
told, like, for the joy set before them, they endured like all these crazy things, these, tortures and trials and just all these things that are the fathers of our faith went through in the first couple centuries. And so when we think about like something that we love to do, whenever I catch myself at work, when I sit down to write some code or whatever, I'm like, oh, I don't really feel like doing this. I'm like, wait a minute, I genuinely love to do this. And so, like, how much effort, yes, we have to put in the effort, how much effort is it to know our spouse? And that's, if it starts to become effort to relate to our spouse, we're like, wait a minute, our marriage is like, it's on this trajectory to just, it's not the right trajectory. And
mm,
so
Yeah.
the same thing with our creator. If
yeah,
it's like, if that's our reaction, then we should be, whoa, wait a minute, alarm bells going off, like, throw the red flags.
Yeah. I think that's a great check and balance system. I think that's a good filter to kind of run it through. And I was
yeah,
kind of jumping to the same conclusion. I was just saying I feel like the Bible also encourages us in this idea of training. And so you were
mm,
talking about an Olympian, and Olympians are all trained by coaches. Nobody trains themselves. They have this coach, this life mentor that pushes them to the very edge before they'll break. Now the coach could push them past it. Like he has the ability to put too much weight on the rack and it would literally break their back, or push them past exhaustion, or do something to actually hurt them. But a really good coach won't do that. It'll bring them right to the breaking point. And I feel like the word says that just later on in 1 Corinthians, when we're talking about 1 Corinthians 9, 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "No trial has overtaken you except such as is common to man, and Elohim is trustworthy, who shall not allow you to be tried beyond what you are able, but with the trial shall also make the way of escape, enabling you to bear it." And I would highly recommend anybody to kind of read that in their word. But Elohim, he is our coach, and here's a promise that he'll never break. Like he won't break us completely. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's this comfort in it. it's going to be work. It's work for things that we truly desire deep down. But we have a promise that he won't give us more than we can bear.
And and two, like just to throw something on top of it, like think about like whenever you work out and you do like a crazy workout or you're training towards something or whatever, and like yes, it sucks to think about the hill that you're about to climb, and then like sometimes while you're doing it and like the grind of it, but like even after like maybe a daily workout, or especially after the particular event or whatever your goal was, like how amazing does it feel like when you're done too, and like how stoked is your coach, and how stoked, and it's just like I don't know, like every time like I've put in the work trying to pursue Father, like I don't know, like it is hard, and I get confused, and I get frustrated, and I get angry even like a lot of the times, and like when that particular piece or season passes, like it's just amazing. I'm like, man, totally worth it. Like every single,
But
why don't I do that more? You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
totally, it's harder when you're sitting in your house thinking about heading out to the gym. That's
Mm-hmm.
the piece that you really, but it always does feel better. But what I'm so encouraged by is Father's like relentless patience with me,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's as though he's excited anytime I make progress, even if I fall the entire way. And kind of the analogy of a child learning to walk. And he
Mm-hmm.
stands up for the first time, he takes a couple of steps, and the parents trying to get him to walk 10 feet, and he only walks a half a foot and falls. The parents still encourage that he tried and that he made some progress.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many times I just look and I'm just like, holy cow, like Father's been
Mhm.
so patient with me, and I'm so excited when I do, when I do make a breakthrough. But
Mm-hmm.
also just looking back at the love side of just he treats that we're his children, and I don't always get that, but I'm encouraged to know that I need to train, but thank you, Father, that you're so patient with me because I choose not to be a kind of a diligent soldier daily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How are we doing on time?
We probably should wrap pretty soon.
Because I want to kind of flip this inside out and full circle back to where we sort of started. And it's so fascinating because even in the context of 1 Corinthians 10, where you were just reading, Ken, you started in 13, talking about no trial that's beyond what we can bear. And then if we continue in 14 and 15, this just wraps it up so nicely. So he gets through that whole thing saying, Elohim will make a way for us to bear the trials that we encounter. And then in verse 14 it says, therefore my beloved ones, so the conclusion, right? The conclusion of this whole thing is, therefore my beloved ones, flee from idolatry. And that could be a whole topic for an entire podcast all in of itself. Idolatry can be so many things, and we've touched on this very, very briefly before. But in a sense, anything that is taking the investment of our lives, anything that we're pouring our lives into that is not our creator, is idolatry. And again, it's like how are we prioritizing our affections, our time, our money, our resources, all of this. And again, it's not saying that if we spend a ton of time with our kids, they're our idols. No, that's not what I'm saying. But if we put our kids before our creator, if we say, hey, we're going to compromise in these areas, the word clearly says X, but we're going to do Y because of our kids, then that's idolatry. And that can be applied on so many levels of the decisions that we make in our daily lives. So in terms of the trials and the testing and the training and the preparation, the conclusion, the purpose of that is to flee idolatry, and that connects back to everything we're kind of studying together, looking at what is contaminated, what is polluted, and how do we come out of that. And then the thing that I wanted to kind of conclude on is verse 15. In light of all that, then he says, I speak as to wise men, judge for yourselves what I say. And so he's laid out this case, and of course 1 Corinthians continues on for a few chapters yet, but he's laid out this case, and then he says, judge for yourselves. And I think this connects back nicely to what we were talking even about Halloween, Christmas, about any of these things that we bring up in these conversations together, judge for yourselves. We have to judge for ourselves, and I think commonly we have this fear, this artificial fear of judging. Again, don't judge lest you be judged. But I think we are commanded in Scripture to judge truth, and I can't judge you for your application of truth, but I can judge what you're saying. Is what you're saying true or not true? Does it line up with Scripture? Does it or does it not? And so I think Paul here, Shaul, is saying, judge for yourselves. Like, here's the evidence, judge.
Mm-hmm. Can you just wrap up with one more thing that we've talked about quite a bit before? And a lot of times we shy away from the word judgment because we're afraid of it. We think judgment's a bad thing. And just a kind of quick example about judgment's good or bad depending on which side of the judgment you're sitting on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things. We have this really negative connotation in terms of the word judgment, and scripturally there's a lot here we could, like you said, it's pretty deep, but scripturally you look at judgment and there's several places where it talks about the righteous rejoicing in the judgment of their Creator, because judgment, again, if you say you get a speeding ticket and you weren't going over the speed limit, you take it to court, you're going to get a judgment one way or the other. And if the judge finds you, innocent of that violation, then that judgment is in your favor. And so you want judgment. It's a positive thing. So if we have nothing to hide from our judge, and if we are living a life as best we know how, consistent with the rules of the court, then there should be no hesitation going before our judge and wanting judgment. And I think that applies in our relationships with each other. If we're genuinely motivated to walk in the integrity of our heart, we should have no fear of being accountable to each other, to call out things that they see or that you guys would see as not being consistent with what I've said I want to do. And so I think a lot of times we put judgment on the negative shelf, when really I think we should pull it off that shelf, and it should be something we desire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could definitely be super positive, especially if you're in a conflict. You definitely want a judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. To make it even more concrete, say you had a dispute with someone and they attacked you and you defended yourself, and you both go before the judge. You want that judgment in your favor. Like, I was just defending myself, and then the guilty are punished, and the innocent are exonerated.
Good. Well, it's just kind of a melting pot of a bunch of stuff, but I thought it was good.
Yeah.
It was neat. It went to some neat little nooks and crannies I hadn't kind of thought about beforehand. So I love Shaw. I love your illustration, and it's amazing. Marriage, husband-wife relationship, all that, everything is so concrete. Again, it's another theme that's probably going to lace itself through all these conversations. But Father's given us so many concrete things to cling to that illustrate reality and truth. And when we just make it that simple, when we make it that concrete, it's obvious what our answer should be a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Well, I guess until next time, it looks like we'll have some other stuff to probably dive back into. So
I know our topic list keeps getting longer. It doesn't seem like we check off one thing and we add 5 things every time.
I'm looking forward to that one thing. Anyways.
Well, we got a good one in the oven for next week, I think, if we're gonna do it next week. So a little teaser out there.
Cool. All right.
All right. Bless.